I'm back for the Timucua Indians. We're reading the Prehistory, Chapter 1. How did people live way back then? What is history? History is anything that has happened in the past. It can be about kings and chiefs, faraway countries, or even the story of how your grandfather learned to make spaghetti. It can be yesterday or 10,000 years ago. What is prehistory? Pre means before, so in this case it means before people wrote down their history. Before people could write, they kept their history by telling stories. After all, story is a big part of history. His story. Sometimes grandparents told the same stories every night so their grandchildren would remember. Other times, a special person was the storyteller for the whole village. Remembering and telling all the village stories was a big job. If something happened to the storyteller, the village history could be lost forever. Many true stories about the Timucua Indians have been forgotten. Because so few of the Timucua ever learned to read and write, hardly any of their stories are written down. Now all of the Timucua are gone, so we have to look hard to find out what these people are like. When Europeans, who are from Spain, France, England, and other countries in Europe, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to America, they met the Timucua people. Many of these Europeans wrote down stories about the Timucua. Some stories were true and some stories were not. Studying his story takes detective work. It is up to us to find the truest stories and remember them. So, Directive 1. Why is it important to write down his story? When you tell a story over and over without writing it down, the story always changes. Try this activity with at least 3 helpers. If you try it at school during lunchtime, lots of people, it works even better. Say the sentence to helper 1. The other should not be listening. My cousin Karen comes for horses, elephants, hens, earthworms, hawks, and eagles. She's a zany 27-year-old zoologist at the Jacksonville Zoo. You can say it for helper number 1 a few times, but after that, don't remind her again. Now she has to say it to helper 2 and after that. It's pretty much like telephone. So you're going to see how it changes. If you don't write history, it changes with each person who tells it. The final story might be different from the one who started with it. Also in indigenous cultures, I'm just going to do a side note, we are taught that oral history is important because the story does change with the person who tells it. Because you keep the essence of what's told, and things change throughout time. And when things are said orally, it allows for us to evolve and change through time too. So the stories aren't always meant to stay the same because the stories are also lessons for us to learn from, Interesting. Just a side note. Where did Native Americans come from? The people who were here 15,000 years ago were called Paleo Indians. They walked to many places. They walked all the way across Siberia. This is very blanket. This is not all tribes creation story. Today, when you get to the northeastern edge of Siberia, you run into the Pacific Ocean. But around 15,000 years ago, the planet was in an ice age. This means that a lot of the water in the oceans was frozen into glaciers. Since so much water was frozen, there wasn't much water left in the ocean. One of those places was by Siberia. The Paleo Indians walked right across this dry ocean bottom. Their path is called the Bering Land Bridge, and it took them right into Alaska. Today, the land bridge is mostly covered by the ocean again. It is cold in Alaska today, and it was cold then too. For these tribes, they did walk across the Bering Bridge. It reminds me of when Noah crossed with the Israelites. So it says, look at a map of where they would have walked, start in Siberia and end in Alaska. So here's a map. As you start in Siberia and go down to Alaska. These Paleo Indians hunted huge nomadic animals like mastodons, large hairy elephants, giant bison, which are buffalo, camels, and whales. After they got to Alaska, they kept on walking, following the herd of large animals. Some walked through Mexico all the way to the tip of South America. Others stayed at different places in the United States. The Paleo Indians may have gotten to Florida about 13,000 years ago. The ones who stayed in North Florida would later be called the Timucua people. Before 2,500 years ago, Native Americans in North Florida and South Georgia did not live in the same place all the time. They moved around to follow herds of animals, to find fresh water, and to look for ripe fruits and vegetables. They did not use bows or arrows or grow gardens. Around 2,500 years ago, their lives started to change. Native Americans learned to use the bow and arrow, and this made them change and become better hunters. They didn't have to travel so far to find meat. They also learned to grow corn and beans in gardens so they can get enough plant food for many of the people. Now they had more food, larger groups of people settled down into villages. They could also stay in one place for longer periods of time. Because their lifestyle changed, their culture or way of life also changed. This new culture and the people who lived it are called Timucua by historians today. The Paleo Indians who stayed in other parts of the United States grew into hundreds of other native groups, like the Arapaho, Cherokee, and Navajo, also known as Danye. So it says, look at the map at figure A again. Draw on a path that the Paleo Indians may have taken to get from Alaska to Florida. So let me see. Florida's way down there. So Alaska, Florida, how they got there. Why are all the Native American tribes different? Well, people who live in different places live in different ways. If you live where it is very cold, as it is in Alaska, you may live in an igloo or go ice fishing. If you live in a warm place with good soil, you may live in a hut and plant a huge garden. If you live on the grassy plains, you may live in a teepee and hunt buffalo. The Paleo Indians learned to live in many different places. That's why there's so many different kinds of Native Americans today. Each Native American group has its own religion, food, dances, laws, clothing, and homes. Why were Native Americans called Indians? When Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, he didn't know that the Americans were out there across the ocean. No one did. I don't think that's true. He planned to sail across the world to get to Indonesia, a group of islands near China. No one had ever done it, and there was no map to show him the way. So when Columbus got close to North America, he thought he was almost near the East Indians, so he called the people Indians. Oops. Also, anybody that's foreign or strange, I had researched, was called an Indian, because as far as they knew, that was the only foreign people. So that's kind of interesting. Native Americans means people who were here first. The reason we still say Timucua Indians is because the Timucua are all gone. Not a single Timucua is alive today that we know of. It is polite and correct to say Native Americans instead of Indians for tribes that are still here today. It depends on who you talk to. Directive number 4. Look at figure B. The arrow shows where Columbus wanted to go. You can't see the East Indies because they're on the other side of the world from us. Columbus never made it to the East Indies. Draw where Columbus really went. Start in Spain and end in the West Indies. Exploring is a lot harder than it looks. So you can see the map that they made. You see where he started in Spain. And you see how he was trying to get to the West Indies, and he got to this lands here. Turtle Island. Alright, and here we are. Number 2. It's going to be language. Can you learn to speak Timucua? That'll be fun. Alright. Love you all. Wopila.